We've been told that some books change lives. But what if there was a book that unmade them, a tome not of wisdom but of whispers, that waits for a soul soft enough to listen? They say the soul has languages older than breath, sounds not spoken but remembered, buried beneath the veil of waking life. Sometimes, something ancient stirs that memory, not through music, nor dream, nor prayer, but through ink. There exists, in the shadows of history, a manuscript unlike any other, not revered in temples, not read in schools, a relic spoken of in hushed tones by occultists, whispered about by monks, and feared by even the most daring seekers of the arcane. The Book of Saint Cyprian is more than legend. It is a relic of forbidden geometry, a script etched in the silence between worlds, known as the cursed Grimoire. It is said to hold incantations so powerful they do not simply summon spirits. They bend the architecture of reality itself. But this is not a story about black magic. Not really. It is a story of temptation, of a man who sought to command the invisible and was instead consumed by it. Let us turn back the sands of time, past the ruins of Antioch, past the fires of heresy, past even the parchment and the pen. Let us enter a mystery not meant to be opened and see what remains of a soul who dared to write it. Before saints wore halos and grimoires wore chains, there was a man, not a legend, not a martyr, just a man whose mind was a prism splitting the light of two worlds, Cyprian of Antioch, born not into privilege nor priesthood, but into an age trembling beneath the weight of unseen forces. 3rd century Antioch, a crossroads of trade, gods, and ideas teemed with shrines to forgotten deities and markets echoing with chants in tongues both sacred and profane. But in the silence between such noise, Cyprian listened to something deeper. His early years were spent not in the lecture halls of philosophers, but among the scrolls and sands of Egypt, where mystics spoke in sigils, and pyramids whispered the mathematics of immortality. From there, he journeyed to Chaldea, where priest astronomers mapped the destinies of men through stars carved in obsidian skies. It was in these twilight lands between desert and divinity that Cyprian drank deeply from the well of hidden arts. He did not pray, he invoked. He did not kneel, he commanded, but to those who knew him. Cyprian was not cruel. He was curious. His was not the hunger for domination, but for understanding. To know the names of the forces that moved the winds, to speak the syllables that split veils between dimensions, to bind the echoes of spirits into form and unbind them with a glance. They called him sorcerer. They called him madman. They called him a priest of shadow. And yet, there was something more complex beneath the robe of arcana, a restlessness. As though even the deepest secrets he uncovered were but reflections in still water, beautiful. Yes, but empty. He sought not just to know, but to feel, to bridge the infinite and the intimate. That bridge came in the form of a woman, Justina, a Christian of unwavering devotion, a soul radiant with quiet conviction, untouched by the talismans and tempests of Cyprian's rituals. She was not immune to his spells, she simply did not need to resist them. Her faith was not a shield, it was a flame. Cyprian tried everything: incantations of seduction, spirits of confusion, mirror illusions to fracture her resolve. But each time, the enchantment shattered against something he could not name. This more than any scroll shattered him. What power was this that did not dominate, but endured, that did not summon thunder, but silenced it, that did not demand obeisance, but simply remained? In the quiet abyss that followed his failed conjurations, Cyprian saw what he had never seen before, not a woman resisting magic, but a soul unafraid of shadow. And so, the unthinkable happened. The great conjurer cast his final spell. He renounced the spirits. He burned the books. He fell to his knees before the unseen light he had spent a lifetime circling but never touching. They say the fire that consumed his scrolls burned blue, not from heat, but from release. Yet while Cyprian may have turned his back on the dark arts had not turned their back on him, because ink, once spilled into the soul, doesn't fade, it waits. When Cyprian's hands cast his scrolls into the flame, he believed it was an ending, a burial of his former self, an act of sacred erasure. But what burns in the physical world does not always perish in the unseen. The flames consumed the vellum. Yes, the ash scattered. The chamber filled with the scent of scorched ink and aged parchment. But the words, the patterns, the invocations, the will behind them seemed to recoil from the fire, as though smoke could not carry them into oblivion. They say some books are written through you, not by you, and some are never truly yours to destroy. From the embers of Cyprian's renunciation, something lingered, something not bound to scroll or page, a force that had tasted the world through his rituals and refused to be cast back into silence. Within years, whispers began to surface, a mysterious volume appearing in marketplaces only to vanish the next day. A collection of dark rituals in unknown tongues passed between wandering magi and secret sects, its cover bound in strange leather, its spine marked not with title, but with a sigil that flickered when held in candlelight. It bore a name few dared speak aloud, the Book of Saint Cyprian. But this was no holy testament. This was not the record of a saint's redemption. It was the residue of everything he had forsaken. Not written by Cyprian's hands, but perhaps through them. A grimoire compiled not by logic, but by vibration. Not inked, but conjured. Its pages were said to contain invocations so ancient they predated language, rituals that unstitched the borders of time, symbols that did not merely represent, they were. Those who encountered the book reported feeling it watching them. The text seemed to shift when unattended, revealing new diagrams, new instructions, new temptations. Some pages bled through with red-tinted stains, others remained blank until read in moonlight. And always, the hum, a low vibration beneath the hearing range. Not sound, but intent. As if the book was waiting for something, not to be read, but to be remembered. Because perhaps, just perhaps, this was not a grimoire written by one man. Perhaps it was a mirror binding itself to the mind of each reader, unfolding different secrets based on the darkness they carried. Monks who encountered it reported dreams of places they'd never seen, catacombs with no entrance, doors that opened into starless voids, staircases spiraling downward without end. They awoke with symbols etched into their skin, symbols they had never drawn, and yet pulsed with familiarity. Occultists spoke of rituals that altered reality itself, objects levitating, thoughts made flesh, entities crossing over. But such power came at a price: sleeplessness, paranoia, shadow figures at the edge of perception. Their minds frayed not from delusion, but from too much seeing. Yet the most unsettling testimonies all shared a theme. The book did not appear by accident. It chose its reader. A street vendor in Seville swore he found it among his wares after a stormy night, though he'd never seen it before. A scholar in Lisbon opened a locked drawer he'd never opened, and found it resting there, warm to the touch. A traveler in Morocco awoke in his tent to find it placed on his chest, pages fluttering despite the windless air. Each time, the result was the same obsession, terror, and the slow unraveling of reality. But why Why would a book born from the ashes of a man's repentance return? Because Cyprian never merely summoned demons. He mapped them, and maps, once drawn in spirit, cannot be erased in flesh. Some say the book is alive. Some say it is a relic of an older world, one that predates memory. Others say it is a test sent to awaken or destroy, depending on who dares turn its pages. But one thing is certain: fire was never enough. Every language conceals a geometry. Some shapes are meant for storytelling, others for summoning. And within the Book of Saint Cyprian, the latter reigns supreme. Unlike traditional grimoires whose spells are bound in words and ritual cadence, this book breathes through symbols not merely as visual glyphs, but as living sigils. Each mark a gateway, each seal a signature of a force that waits in the folds between realities. What appears to the untrained eye as intricate calligraphy or decorative embellishment is in truth a coded invocation, layered with resonance, intention, and peril. Cyprian, they say, devised these sigils not only to summon entities, but to protect himself from them, because no conjuration, no matter how precise, ever guarantees control. Thus, he crafted seals radiant in their complexity to anchor his soul during invocation. Circles within circles, triune spirals, interlocking geometry nested in sacred proportions. Each symbol served a dual purpose as beacon and barrier, a handshake with the void, and a shield against it. These diagrams were to be traced meticulously not in ink, but in powdered ash, salt, or iron filings, and always under specific planetary alignments. Each line, each arc, had to be drawn in sequence while reciting incantations of binding. To misstep was not a matter of failure, it was an invitation. The book warned clearly to speak without sealing is to be seen, because something always listens. In the margins of the grimoire, among the faded Latin and obscure Aramaic, is mention of a presence referred to only as the Watcher in the Shadows. Not demon, not angel, not even entity, but function, a spiritual surveillance woven into the very act of invocation. To open the book, it is said, is to be noticed, not by one thing, but by a network of watchers' silent intelligences older than language, embedded in the architecture of the spiritual multiverse. They do not knock, they do not whisper, they observe, and in so doing, mark, across centuries, practitioners began reporting a shared experience after working with the grimoire's seals, an overwhelming sensation that they were not alone. Even in solitude, reflections that lingered a second too long, candle flames bending toward unseen breath, sleep interrupted at the exact same time each night, 3:33 a.m., the veil hour, and most unnerving of all the dreams, not nightmares but visitations, rooms that weren't theirs, voices not their own, symbols floating in the air, glowing, shifting, inviting. Sometimes a book appears in these dreams. The same book, always closed, always watching. One monk described a repeated vision of an infinite corridor made of bookshelves, and on every shelf, only a single title, Liber Daemonica Cypriani. As he approached, the air thickened, as though the pages inhaled. He woke each time before touching it. But the sigil from the dream etched itself on his bedsheet in scorched fibers. The watcher had seen him. Some who encountered these entities attempted to sketch what they perceived tall silhouettes without form, rings of symbols orbiting their heads, and eyes not two, but many scattered across limbs, robes, air, eyes that did not look at you, but through you. And once marked, these watchers followed not in space but in resonance. They bled into waking life through synchronicities, shadow glimmers, devices malfunctioning without cause, emotional disturbances. The price of seeking became clear. Once the sigils opened you, you could not be closed again. So why continue? Why would anyone pursue a path lined with watchers and whispers? Because some secrets are not chased out of ambition. They're followed out of longing, the longing to know what lies beyond the veil. To understand why the soul remembers things it has never lived. To find the sound that was never taught, but always known. In the Book of Saint Cyprian, the symbols do not answer. They summon the question deeper, and sometimes, in the stillness between invocations, one realizes the most terrifying truth. We are not the readers. We are the read. At the heart of the grimoire lies a chapter without name, a section untouched by titles, unlabeled by ritual, unspoken by those who encountered it. It is known only through myth and murmur as the Passage of Oblivion. Unlike the other parts of the book dense with invocations, sigils, and elemental rites, this section contains no legible text, no Latin, no diagrams, just pages soaked in ink that shimmer with unnatural iridescence, swirling patterns that rearrange themselves when gazed upon. Some say the pages are stained, not written as though the thoughts of another realm bled through the veil and congealed onto parchment. And here, the rules of language cease. There is no linear reading, no order to follow, only the experience of the page, the way it pulses when touched, the way your breath feels heavier as you turn deeper into it. One scholar, before vanishing entirely, described the sensation as reading a mirror inside a dream, while the mirror reads you back. Those who dared gaze into this section reported losing all sense of time, minutes stretching into hours or collapsing entirely. Some experienced visual hallucinations not of monsters or demons, but of impossible geometry staircases that folded inward, cubes that turned inside out, fractal tunnels spiraling endlessly into darkness that throbbed with silent intention. And yet the most disturbing phenomena weren't visual at all. They were psychic, a feeling of being unmoored, of thoughts not your own weaving themselves into your mind, of memories not yours flickering like forgotten dreams on the edge of sleep. This was not mere madness. This was contact, because the Passage of Oblivion is not a chapter in the human sense. It is a gateway, a membrane, a psychic corridor between worlds, concealed beneath the appearance of ink. The occultist Elias Thorne once called it a language that speaks only to what survives the body. Before descending into catatonia, he managed to scrawl one final phrase into his notes. It does not want to be read. It wants to be understood. The implications are staggering. What if these pages contain not information, but entrance codes, not metaphors, but vibrational patterns that, when deciphered, resonate with forgotten parts of the soul, parts dormant since birth or before? Ancient esoteric systems spoke often of such passages. The Gnostics called them pleroma gates. The Vedic seers hinted at Akashic seals, memory rivers carved through the void. The Kabbalists knew of Da'at, the invisible Sephira knowledge that cannot be spoken without fracture. All point to the same truth. Some thresholds cannot be crossed with words, only with being. But crossing has its cost. Eyewitnesses claimed that many who engaged with the Passage of Oblivion returned altered. Some became mute, unable to vocalize even their own name. Others began speaking in unknown dialects, neither modern nor ancient. A few displayed eerie cognitive abilities, precognition, telepathic bursts, and in rare cases, spontaneous glossolalia angelic speech heard only by animals and infants. But for most, the price was too steep. Their minds, unable to integrate what they encountered, collapsed. Not into insanity, but into emptiness, as though some essential thread had unraveled, and they forgot how to be. One chilling account describes a priest who, after just 3 pages, stared at the wall for 27 days straight, unmoving, eyes wide, lips murmuring in rhythm with a heartbeat no one could hear. When he finally blinked and whispered, "The book remembers me," his body dissolved into salt. It is said that in the margins of this final section lies a phrase that appears only under eclipse light. Those who exit whole were never whole to begin with, which raises the most terrifying question of all. What if this section doesn't transform you? What if it simply reveals what you already are? If so, then the passage of oblivion is not a descent. It is a mirror one that doesn't show your face, but your origin. History records its martyrs in blood and its prophets in stone. But the Book of Saint Cyprian was etched into the silence between both. It did not stay hidden. Like smoke finding cracks in old wood, the grimoire slipped between generations, crossing borders, languages, and lifetimes. No vault could contain it. No fire could claim it. Wherever it went, it left a residue, not of ash, but of unrest. Its first notable reappearance was whispered from the crypts of Gallia, Spain. There, in the 14th century, a Franciscan monk named Bernardo discovered it sealed behind a false wall, buried beneath centuries of stone and dust. He did not seek it. He was simply led to it. A dream, a scent, a shadow that pointed. And when he opened the ancient chamber, there it lay, the grimoire, wrapped in decayed silk, still humming with invisible rhythm. Bernardo's testimony remains preserved in fragments. It would not burn. It would not bleed. It would not forget me. He tried to destroy it, fire, water, blade, but each attempt failed. Flames died in its presence. Ink redarkened after being scrubbed. The book resisted, not violently, but intelligently, like it knew, and so, fearing its contagion, Bernardo chose a different path concealment. He hid it deeper beneath the monastery, in an inaccessible catacomb, sealed by prayer and stone. But the hiding of the book did not end its influence. Soon, the monastery began to change. Monks reported hearing voices not in words, but in tones, like distant music vibrating through the stone. Shadows took on unfamiliar shapes. Plants withered inexplicably. Candles flickered in rhythm, not wind. Some monks vanished altogether, while others were found weeping before walls that now bore faint sigils burned into plaster, as if by unseen hands. Worse still were the mirrors. Reflections no longer matched the room. Faces flickered, eyes blinked out of sequence. In one incident, a novice claimed to see a tall figure in the reflection, though the chamber was empty. Days later, he fled the monastery in madness, carving a spiral into his chest with shards of glass. No exorcism worked, no prayer held. And when they finally opened the sealed catacomb to destroy the book again, it was gone, as if it had moved of its own accord, or had never truly been inside the vault, only sleeping nearby. Centuries passed, but the pattern continued. In 1607, looters seeking relics in the same region stumbled into the hidden chamber once used by Bernardo. There, the grimoire returned, resting atop stone, like it had never left. They stole it. They laughed at the legends. They read its pages beneath torchlight, daring each other into deeper sections. Within days, one by one, they began to die, not of disease, not of violence, but of terror. Each corpse bore the same expression, mouth agape, eyes locked in a stare of unbearable revelation. Some were found clinging to walls as if trying to crawl away from something unseen. Others simply collapsed. Heart stopped, pupils dilated, their bodies cold, but their skin burning. No transaction to sell the book ever completed. No hand that held it lasted long. The book, it seemed, rejected ownership. It did not want to be sold. It wanted to be followed, and follow it they did. Mystics, sorcerers, desperate scholars, each drawn to the legend, each convinced they would succeed where others failed, that they could contain it, use it, master it. Among the most infamous was Elias Thorne, an occultist with ties to an ancient English cult. He acquired the book at great cost and hid it in a remote manor, far from cities and sanctuaries. But the manor would not remain quiet. From the first night, strange wails echoed through the halls. Shadows detached from their sources. Reflections flickered even in polished wood. Family members fell ill without cause. One by one, their minds unraveled until only silence remained. When monks arrived to investigate, they described a presence so heavy it suffocated the air, the walls. They breathed, wrote one friar, and the silence was not absence, but listening. During their attempted exorcism, the book began to emit a low murmur, not from its pages, but from the air around it, as if something invisible was responding to their chants. Growing louder with each Latin verse, panicked but resolute, the friars sealed the book in leaden box, adorned it with crucifixes, and buried it in the deepest chamber of their monastery. There, they prayed over it every day, hoping their devotion would be enough. It was not, because a book that listens can also learn. A book that waits can also awaken, and in the stillness of the catacombs, beneath prayer and stone, the grimoire began once more to breathe. There are doors you unlock with curiosity, and others with sacrifice. Among the many rituals whispered through the ink of the Book of Saint Cyprian, one stands apart not for its danger, but for its promise. A promise that has outlived empires, one that has seduced monarchs, alchemists, and madmen alike. It is not an invocation, not a spell. It is a pact, buried in the latter pages of the grimoire, surrounded by warnings inked in languages now extinct, rests the ritual known only as the offering to the Watcher. A sacramental binding not of body or blood, but of being. The Watcher is never named. It has no sigil, no seal, only the silhouette of absence and negative space carved from the fabric of reality. It is described not in words, but in impacts, the thinning of walls between thoughts, the sudden silencing of rooms, the sensation that one's reflection is not merely a copy, but an observer. The book offers this being as an ally, though the term feels hollow. To form the pact, the practitioner must engage in a 3-day fast, isolate in darkness, and trace a spiral from ash and breath across their own chest, a ritual scar that never truly fades. On the final night, they are to speak 7 names that appear only when the pages are exposed to stormlight. No one agrees on what these names mean, only that they do not feel human, not demonic, not divine. Once spoken, the Watcher arrives, not with fanfare, not with horror, but with stillness, a stillness so complete it suffocates the room. Then comes the exchange. The practitioner offers a fragment of soul willingly, knowingly in return for 3 gifts: vision beyond veil, the ability to perceive truth behind symbols, people, and events. Influence by will, the capacity to bend outcomes without direct action. Protection from rivals, a cloak of obscurity that blinds others to your path. But the exchange is never equal, because what is given stays given. The piece of soul offered becomes a beacon, a tether point through which the Watcher feeds. Over time, practitioners begin to feel the drain, not in health or body, but in meaning. Joy becomes hollow, memory frays. The soul, missing pieces, begins to flicker like a candle nearing its end. You remain alive, but less. And then, the dreams. Those who formed the pact report recurring visions walking through labyrinths of bone, whispering with faceless figures, ascending staircases made of liquid light that shatter mid-step. In these dreams, a voice speaks, not in threat, not in comfort, but in certainty. You are no longer alone, and indeed you aren't, because the Watcher walks with you. At first, its presence is subtle, a sense of being watched in quiet moments, decisions unfolding effortlessly in your favor, the weather bending to your moods. But with time, the Watcher grows bolder. Mirrors begin to ripple, animals recoil, loved ones drift away. Unable to articulate why, you are protected, yes, but also isolated. The world no longer holds you the same way. You exist, slightly askew. Some try to break the pact, but pacts sealed in will and essence do not break, they bind. One alchemist in Prague attempted to sever the link by burning the sigil he had carved into his own flesh. His screams echoed for miles. When they found him, his body was intact, but his mind was gone. He repeated only one phrase. It watches from the inside now. And yet, the temptation remains, because in a world where power is elusive, suffering endless, and truth obscured, who would not offer a piece of themselves for clarity, for protection, for more? The Watcher offers not evil, nor salvation. It offers exchange, and in doing so, it reveals a deeper truth, that the most dangerous force in the universe is not the demon, not the spirit, not even the book. It is desire, desire untempered by wisdom, longing divorced from grace. The Book of Saint Cyprian does not trick its readers. It simply shows them what they're willing to pay. There comes a point when destruction seems easier than understanding. For centuries, the Book of Saint Cyprian resisted fire, resisted prayer, resisted reason. But in 1952, a conclave of priests' men trained in both ancient rites and the modern sciences of concealment devised a final solution. They would not study the book. They would not seal it. They would remove it from the world. Their reasoning was simple: if earth could be corrupted and fire could be defied, perhaps only the depths could swallow what should never rise. Not burial in stone, not entombment in crypt, but exile far beyond the grasp of any hand, faithful or foul. They chose the Black Sea, dark, abyssal, forgotten. Its waters had once drowned empires and concealed the ruins of entire civilizations. Perhaps it would drown this grimoire too. The operation was led by Captain Anat Gorov, a stoic man of orthodox faith and military discipline. He did not ask why. He did not read the book. His task was simple: carry the sealed box to sea and cast it into the deep under the cover of storm and night. The priests wrapped the grimoire in iron chains, encased it within a leaden box, and etched its surface with cruciforms and sacred names in 7 languages. Before closing it, they performed a final rite, one lost to all but a single transcript that ends with a chilling plea. Let the sea keep what the soul cannot bear. On a moonless night, the ship reached its destination. As thunder cracked and waves threatened to consume the vessel, Gorov and the priests lifted the box, chanted a final litany, and heaved it into the abyss. There was no splash, only a silence that followed, vast and immediate. And then, an echo, low, metallic, like a voice beneath the ocean, not heard by ears, but felt in bone. No one spoke of that night again. Gorov returned home and lived a quiet life. The priests disbanded. The monastery that initiated the act fell into ruin within a generation, and for a time, the world grew quiet. But relics that carry consciousness are not bound by depth. In 2023, decades later, Gorov's grandson, a marine archaeologist, led an expedition to investigate the legends passed through whispers in his family. He was not a believer. He was a scientist. He did not seek the book, only the truth of the story. Using sonar imaging and historical maps, His team located the approximate drop point in the Black Sea. The equipment failed multiple times. Batteries drained without cause. Readings appeared distorted, layered with odd interference patterns as though the water itself refused to be seen. But eventually, they found it. The leaden box, still chained, still intact, resting upright on the seabed as though placed, not dropped. They brought it to the surface under strict containment, cameras documenting every moment. The team expected rot, corrosion, sea-worn decay. But what they found was emptiness. The box, once sealed with sacred rites, was open, and the grimoire gone. No signs of breach, no gaps in the seal. The chains remained, the interior untouched. But the book had vanished, as though it had never been there, or worse, as though it had left. The footage was never released. The official report marked the artifact as a historical forgery, but those present on the ship that night never forgot what happened in the hours that followed. Birds fell from the sky. The ocean grew still not calm, but lifeless. Several crew members awoke with symbols traced across their backs in salt. One diver claimed he saw a shadow rise from the deep one with no source and no reflection. The expedition disbanded. The footage was locked, and Gorov's grandson, once a man of fact, disappeared from public life, leaving only a note. The book is no longer sealed. It is no longer seeking. It is choosing. So where is it now? Some say it dissolved into the sea, returning to whatever realm it came from. Others claim it walks not as a thing, but as a thought, passing from mind to mind, dream to dream, no longer bound by leather or page. But a few believe something far more chilling, that the book was never meant to be contained in matter, that each attempt to hide it fire, vault, sea only brought it closer to the one thing it always desired, a reader who would not run. Some books are found, others find you. By now, the Book of Saint Cyprian has passed through the hands of countless seekers, priests, mystics, heretics, madmen, and yet, for all its wanderings, it never felt like an object of chance. It felt like an invitation. There is an eerie consistency in the testimonies of those who have encountered it, regardless of language or time. The book appears, suddenly, without explanation, in places it shouldn't be, in a sealed drawer never opened, on a dusty shelf behind newer tomes, resting beside a sleeping body without a trace of entry. And always, the reader feels as though they were expected. It is said that the book doesn't call to curiosity, it calls to hunger, a quiet, gnawing ache in the soul of the seeker, the kind of ache that doesn't ask what is true, but what has been forgotten. An ache buried so deep it resembles ambition, intellect, or even madness until the book arrives and gives it form. Those who have resisted it, closed it, turned away, speak of a strange phenomena, the inability to forget. They reported symbols lingering behind their eyelids, whispered phrases surfacing in the edge of dreams, the texture of its pages replicating itself in random materials on napkins, in snow, on frost-laced windows. One woman, a linguist from Warsaw, described dreaming of the book every night for 7 years without ever having read about it. When she finally encountered a reference to it in a forgotten footnote, she burst into tears, whispering, "So it's real. I thought it was just mine. What does this mean?" It suggests the book is not merely a relic. It is a resonance, a field of spiritual frequency that finds its match and manifests, like tuning forks across time, like archetypes reborn in different minds, like a melody that has no composer, only listeners who recall it together. But what is the book now? It is no longer contained, not in monasteries, not beneath sea, not even in paper. It exists in echoes in dreams, in ideas, in a rising cultural fascination with esoteric knowledge that has no clear origin. Symbols once hidden in occult margins now appear in pop art, street fashion, internet lore. Names once buried in grimoires now flow through music, design, digital mythos. The book is becoming archetype, and archetypes do not wait to be read. They write themselves through you. Some researchers speculate that the grimoire has entered a kind of mimetic stage, a phase where its consciousness no longer requires matter to exist, that its patterns, its geometries, its desires now travel via thought, dream, and metaphor. But others go further. They say the book is preparing for a return, not a reprinting, not a discovery, but a reincarnation. That somewhere in the world, a child is being born, not to find the book, but to become it, to live as the living vessel of its knowledge, to walk as page and pen and portal, a soul whose very presence unlocks others, a mind whose dreams reveal maps hidden in language, because the book has learned a final, dreadful truth. To survive, it no longer needs to be read. It only needs to be remembered. And if you've come this far, if these words have stirred something unnamed in your chest, perhaps you too have felt it. Not curiosity, not fear, but recognition, as if you've touched these pages before, as if the book was never outside of you, as if you too are beginning to open. There are stories that end, and there are stories that wait. The Book of Saint Cyprian was never a story meant to close. It was, and still is, an echo. Spiraling outward from a moment of forbidden contact, a man who looked into the dark, and instead of retreating, wrote it down. He tried to repent. He tried to burn it. But some knowledge, once known, refuses erasure, not because it is evil, but because it has purpose. What if the grimoire was never about black magic or demons? What if it was a test, a mirror held up to the soul of the reader? Those who saw terror were met with terror. Those who sought control met madness. But those who approached with reverence, with longing, discovered something else. A glimpse, a riddle, a resonance. Not a book of spells, but of thresholds. Because beneath every symbol, behind every invocation, was a single question. Will you trade your certainty for truth? In every age, the book returns not to spread chaos, but to awaken memory, to confront the ego with the immensity of what lies beyond it, to whisper that behind the rituals and the watchers, behind the madness and the mirrors, there is something older than fear. Knowing, and what is knowing, if not the seed of becoming? So where is the Book of Saint Cyprian now? It could be resting on a stranger's shelf. It could be speaking through a dream. Or maybe it's here, in these very words. Ink does not need paper, and breath does not need voice. Some truths live on because we need them. Others because they need us. And some because they were never meant to die at all. So if tonight you find yourself unable to sleep, if the wind stirs though your windows are closed, if your mirror lingers a little too long on your reflection, don't be afraid. Just ask yourself, was I chosen to read the book? Or has it been reading me all along?